Welcome back to Armatage Candle Company. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the cost of goods sold so that you understand how much it costs to actually produce everything that goes into this candle, so that when you set a price, you know you're actually turning a profit, because if you don't turn a profit, you're going to go out of business. We're going to dive deep. We're going to run through the formulas. We're going to pull up some real pricing pages. We're going to do some whiteboard work. So grab your pen and pencil, put on your thinking cap, and let's dive in. So our cost of goods sold can really be simplified into one big equation, cost of goods sold, and that's going to equal material cost, materials, plus the labor, the actual time it takes to make things, plus the overhead, all the electricity, internet, all your equipment costs, etc. That will fall into overhead. And we're going to go into each of these and simplify them. Let's start with materials. So materials refers to the physical items that are inside of your candle. So I'm drawing here, this is a lid. There's going to be a wick inside the candle. This is a finished candle here. There's going to be a label here, Armatage Candle Company. And there will be the actual wax for the candle, which has fragrance oil. We can take this candle and say inside of this candle there are several materials, right? There is a lid, there's a container, we have wax, we have fragrance oil, we have a wick, and we have a label. And all of these items need to be calculated separately in order to figure out our material cost. So for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. You might say, hey, when we buy containers, it costs us roughly $1.96. When we buy a lid, we know that that's roughly 5 cents. When we buy a wick, we know that our wick pricing for one wick is somewhere in the ballpark of 10 cents. And we can do the same thing with our label, which is probably somewhere in the realm of, let's just say, 36 cents. Wax and fragrance oil are a little different though. I've taken a few screenshots here from some vendors that we can take and run some calculations. So I'm going to walk through how I think about that and how you can come up with a number for your wax and your fragrance oil. We're going to back up a few steps and say that for this candle, we need to know a few things. We need to know how much wax and how much fragrance oil are we using. So I'm going to make some assumptions here with my recipe for this candle. And I'm going to say for my wax, this candle uses about 12.49 ounces. And for my fragrance oil, I'm going to say that this uses about 0.63 ounces. I'm just ripping this from another recipe that I have. We need to know this information. How much are we using? Are we using? Okay, and then now we're going to calculate the unit cost of both of those materials. So let's do wax first. When we look at this sales page, we can see that the cost is $107.18, and this is for a 46-pound case. So we have a $116 or $107.18 per 46 pounds. This is our rate. This is how much we're paying for every pound of wax. Well, the problem is that we're actually measuring our wax in our formula in ounces. So we have to do a conversion to figure out how much that is. Our wax cost is going to be this. Wax equals, we have 12.49 ounces. We're going to multiply that by $107.18 divided by the 46 pounds. And then we need to convert our pounds to ounces. So we'll say for every 1 pound, we have 16 ounces. So let's pull our calculator up over here. And we'll say we've got 12.49 ounces times $107.18 divided by 46 divided by 16. And that means we have $1.82 worth of wax based on what we bought from the vendor. So our material cost there, our COGS for the wax part of it, is $1.82. Now that's the hard version. That's when the vendor doesn't necessarily give it to you in cost per ounces, and that's rare because we buy it in pounds, but we build our recipes out in ounces typically. But here for fragrance oil now, let's shift over to fragrance oil. We have a much nicer look at things. They actually list it out in the ounces, the dollars per ounce. And if we ignore shipping, and if we ignore everything else, this is a pretty good shorthand to use. So we know that our fragrance oil, in our case, is we have 0.63 ounces. 0.63 ounces. We're going to multiply that by the rate that they give us here, by $1.60 per every 1 ounce. 1 ounce. And that is going to come out to 0.63 times 1.60, almost exactly $1. $1.01 worth of fragrance oil. $1.01 worth of fragrance oil. So we can now add these numbers in here that we've calculated. So we've calculated our wax is going to be $1.82, and our fragrance oil is going to be $1.01. To calculate our materials COGS, we just have to add up everything that went into our candle. This will depend on the nature of your candle, but let's add that up now. I'm not smart enough to do this in my head. So we've got 5 cents for the lid, plus $1.96 for the container, $1.82 for the wax, $1.01 for the fragrance oil, 10 cents for the wick, and 36 cents for the label. So $5.30 is our material cost of goods sold. Let's take that number and we'll post it up over here right above the equation. Then we'll clear out the screen to talk about labor and overhead. So this was $5.30. Before we continue, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor today, Moonlight. Moonlight is a candle making software that helps you calculate your cost of goods sold, but it also helps you track all your recipe designs and does all the math for you when you create a new batch. Moonlight has an exceptional suite of different tools that help you run every aspect of your candle business without having scattered notes or spreadsheets or complicated formulas everywhere you look. Moonlight was built to help you run your workshop from the palm of your hand. It works on any device, whether that's a laptop or your phone or a tablet. You can give it a shot now by going to moonlight.app. We'll put the link below. Let's get back to the video. All right, let's shift our conversation now to calculate labor. Now, labor is an interesting one because a lot of people don't pay for help to do these candles. They don't pay themselves an hourly wage to do this stuff. So how do you even start with this? I mean, how do you pay for the labor when you're not paying for labor? Well, there's a few things we can do. One, there's just the basic equation for it, which is labor cost equals the hourly wage times the hours worked, and then you divide that by the number of candles created in that period of time. So if we say, for argument's sake, that our hourly wage is $15 an hour per hour, and we work for, let's just say 2 hours, and in that time we can batch out and create about 65 candles, then our final number is going to be, for labor on this estimate, is $15 an hour times 2 hours divided by 65 candles. And that's roughly 46 cents of labor. So that's going to be 0.46 cents. Well, that's pretty complicated. How do you know that it's $15 an hour? How do you keep track of how many candles you made in an hour? And how do you really want to be so finicky that you're tracking time that much? Well, the better shorthand would be to say that labor is actually just going to be based on the materials cost. So we'll say materials times some small percentage. And I would say roughly, we'll say 15%. So times 0.15. And that will give us a materials cost of We have a materials cost of 5.3 cents, 5.3 times 0.15 is going to work out to about 79 cents, about 80 cents. A little more than what we had there. 0.8, not $80. So this is a shorthand, and you can estimate this number. You can take this number. This is 15%, but this can be anywhere from 10% to 25%. Depends on how laborious your process is. But this could be typically a good shorthand. So let's add this labor cost using our shorthand to our equation here. And now let's talk about overhead. I'm going to clear the whiteboard one more time. Okay, so overhead is a bit of a strange beast because overhead includes so many different things. Overhead is equipment. Overhead can be utilities. Overhead could be subscriptions to services. Overhead is literally everything inside of your business that isn't being directly qualified into the candle itself. This is not labor, this is not materials, this is everything else inside of your candle business. It is a beast to calculate. We did an entire video talking through how to price your candles, how to look at overhead. There's a lot of different ways to do that. We're going to simplify it today. At a high level, you could say, if you had all the numbers and you were running the data, that your overhead equals your monthly overhead, meaning all the non-candle direct costs, divided by the number of candles produced in a month. The problem with this equation is this number is kind of ridiculous to try to calculate, especially when you're just talking about something that isn't going to be a significant amount of your COGS for most of us. If you're running a huge business, that could be a different story. But the shorthand way is to simplify it and base it off of the material cost. Again, to actually add equals just kind of a flat rate of somewhere between 50 cents to $1.50. And this number is totally dependent on what you want to do, but it's essentially saying, hey, we know our materials, our labor, and overhead is going to be pretty fixed. Unless you have things changing a lot in your business, you can generally just subscribe a single number into your overhead if you even want to include it at all. For the sake of this, we'll say that our overhead here is roughly 75 cents per candle. So, putting it all together, our total COGS with our simple example is going to equal our materials, which is $5.30, plus our labor, which was $80, plus our overhead, which we're adding a flat fee of 75 cents, which means our COGS equals, and someone's probably already figured this out before me, we'll say $5.30 plus 80 cents plus 75 cents. Roughly estimated, our cost of goods sold for this candle is going to be $6.85. So, how do we use this number? How do we actually take our COGS and apply it to our business? That's what we'll do in the next step. So first, let's assign this COGS here as $6.85. So the question of pricing is largely philosophical because it depends on a lot of factors like who you're selling to, where you're selling, etc. But one thing that is always true is your price has to be greater than or equal to your cost of goods sold. Otherwise, you're on the fast track to losing a lot of money. The shorthand for most candle makers is to do this. Price should equal cost of goods sold times roughly 3. And then if you're selling wholesale, meaning you're selling in bulk to some sort of supplier, wholesale price, wholesale is going to equal your cost of goods sold times 2 or times 1.5. The third method for pricing is to say that price is going to be cost of goods sold times the profit margin. The profit margin being whatever we decide we want it to be, times the profit margin. So let's do each of these. So with our $6.85 cost of goods sold that we calculated up here, our price, if we just multiply it by 3, is going to be $6.85 times 3, which works out to what? equals $20.55. If we multiply by 2, that's going to be $13.70. Am I right? Do I have that right? We're going to calculate it anyways. I don't want to look like a fool on the internet here. $6.85 times 2. $13.70. Boom, first try. Got it. I'm the best. Okay, and then our price with a profit margin, let's just say that our desired profit margin is, 150%, is going to equal $6.85 times 150%, 150%, which is divided by 100 to actually change it from a percentage to a decimal, and that's just 6.85 times 1.5, so it's not even higher than our wholesale, but that would be 1.5, $10.28, $10.28. Well, one thing we want to know is that our cost of goods sold here, this is just an estimate. So this number we should really change into something that makes a little more sense. This could be $19.99, or we could change it to something like $24. $24. Something in the realm here. This gives us a ballpark of where we want to play, what kind of game we want to play, depending on how we position ourselves. Same thing with this. Now, since you're selling wholesale, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be a neat price, so it could be $13.70, but you could easily just say the wholesale price per candle is going to be $14. And then for this bad boy, we'll just pull them down to roughly pull them up to $10.50. So we know we're getting at least 150% profit margin on our cost of goods sold. Now, we did a whole video on how to actually use pricing, what's the pricing philosophy, how do you figure out, where you're even supposed to be with this. These are just the shorthands based on your cost of goods sold. Remember, the most important thing in this entire game is to make sure that your price is greater than or equal to your cost of goods sold. So take the time to work through understanding the materials, the labor, and the overhead so that you can price effectively and run your business successfully. Anyways, that's all I have for you. I hope some of that was helpful, useful, or insightful. I'll put some link to the detailed blog post below, as well as Moonlight, if you want to check that out, because that helps automate a lot of the things that we were talking about. Anyways, I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.